Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Aubrey Reeves, CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I would first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am a settler speaking to you from Takaranto. I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat people and the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. We are pleased to be co-presenting with the Canadian Arts Coalition today's conversation with Canada Council for the Arts CEO, Michelle Chawla. Business and Arts is a long-standing member and collaborator of the coalition, as we deeply believe in the power of collective advocacy. Today's discussion will be co-moderated by Canadian Arts Coalition Steering Committee members, Christina Lowen, the Executive Director of the Association for Opera in Canada, and Carla Etienne, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Dance Assembly. I have just a few housekeeping items before we begin. We are happy to have ASL interpretation, auto-generated captions in English and French, as well as live French translation for today's session. Please use the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to adjust your language settings. Only the presenters and moderators will have our microphones on today. We had over 85 questions pre-submitted by the audience, so obviously we won't be able to get to the bulk of those questions. However, there are some broad themes that emerged, which Tara Mazurk from PAA Inc. has curated into several questions. The session is scheduled for an hour. At the end of today's session, we also ask everyone to take a minute to complete a brief survey about the speaker series. We'd greatly appreciate your feedback and thoughts, which will help us shape future programming. Now, before we begin, I would like to take a moment to welcome and thank our presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada. They've been our partner since the inception of the speaker series in 2020, and they are represented today by their Senior Vice President, Paul Genet. Welcome, Paul.
Merci, Aubrey, et bonjour à toutes et à tous, et bienvenue. Appreciate the shout out, Aubrey. It means a lot to us, and I'm just delighted to be with you today and to learn that there are over 680 people registered for today's session. That's amazing. This really speaks volumes about the importance of the Business Arts Speaker Series and its ability to convene folks in the arts and culture sector. Clearly, arts workers, artists, and administrators want to hear directly from senior policymakers in government and the arts councils, connect with and learn from each other. I also want to thank the Canadian Arts Coalition for collaborating on today's session and really for driving collective advocacy efforts in Canada year-round. It's really important work, so bravo to the Canadian Arts Coalition. We all know that our sector has not just bounced back following COVID. There are tons of challenges and struggles ahead, so it's critical that we hang together and advocate together as much as possible. Power Corporation, I want to say, recognizes that this speaker series is a key arts convening space. So it gives me genuine pleasure to share with you today that Power Corporation has just made a new 3-year commitment as presenting partner of the Business and Arts Speakers Series. Aubrey, Jennifer, and your team at Business Arts, we are really proud to be your continuing partner for another 3 years. Beyond the speaker series, I applaud the impact that Business Arts is having through its programs, especially via ArtsVest, a signature training and mentorship program. ArtsVest strengthens the capacity of small and medium-sized arts organizations to build their own partnerships with local businesses. This is critical to their sustainability. Last year, some 495 organizations participated in ArtsVest, 70% of whom are in rural, remote, or underserved communities, which is really a testament to the program's reach into every corner of the country. By the way, program intake is ongoing and free. It only takes 2 minutes to sign up at businessandarts.org/artsvest. You can find this on the Business Arts website. Support for the arts from local businesses and the corporate sector is more important than ever. It's also very complementary to the absolutely critical work of the Canada Council. We really need both for a strong and vibrant arts sector. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Michelle Chawla today. And let me just add that it's really an honor to share a bit this platform with Michelle, who's dedicated her life and career to Canada's artists and the arts and culture scene. She's new in this job as CEO, but she's done an incredible amount of work over many years at the council prior to being appointed to the top job. She's been refocusing programs to make them more effective and contributed literally to the doubling of funding for the council, a huge accomplishment. Michelle, your leadership is already deeply appreciated. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christina Lowen from the Canadian Arts Coalition to get us started. Over to you, Christina, and grand merci, miigwech.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for the support of Power Corporation for this important speaker series. As a member of the steering committee for the Canadian Arts Coalition, I'd like to set the context for this call. The Coalition is a nonpartisan English-French language cross-cutting collective working with multiple agencies, ministries, and departments to help shape a policy framework that supports all the ways arts and culture intersect with Canadian society. Our work includes liaising with a number of federal ministries, including the Department of Canadian Heritage, Global Affairs around the role of cultural diplomacy, Employment and Social Development Canada around strengthening the workplace on behalf of our over 650,000 cultural workers, and more. One of the most prominent relationships we have is that to the Canada Council for the Arts, and we were instrumental in the doubling of their budget in 2017. In terms of the context for this call today, this conversation will be about collective advocacy. This is about our public-facing work together, and not so much about insider service or client issues. At the Coalition, we wish to present a strong, united advocacy collective sector that speaks with one voice and to be aligned in our many objectives for the sector now and in the future. And I'm very much looking forward to the many ways we might achieve this. So on behalf of the Coalition, it's my great pleasure to welcome Michelle Chawla and to hand the speaking over to her.
Thank you so much, Christina, and I'm so pleased to be here today. And thank you for the really warm welcome, Paul, and to the Canadian Arts Coalition and Business of the Arts for organizing the event. And especially thank you for everyone who is in attendance today. So as Director and CEO of the Canada Council, one of my top priorities is to strengthen our relationship with the sector in order to better serve you. That is our mandate. Artists and arts organizations play such an important role in the life and culture of this country and across the world. And your amazing talent and creativity, leadership, strength, and continued dedication to the arts in the face of growing challenges is really inspiring. And I speak on behalf of everyone at the Canada Council to say thank you for all the incredible work. I recognize that there are probably French speakers in the audience, so I'm just going to repeat that in French. Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous, et je suis vraiment heureuse d'être ici aujourd'hui. J'aimerais remercier Paul pour la belle introduction, ainsi que la Coalition canadienne des arts et Affaires pour les arts pour avoir organisé cette rencontre. Et merci à tous qui sont ici présentes pour cette session. Une des grandes priorités pour moi en ce moment, c'est de travailler avec tous les collègues au Conseil des arts pour rebâtir les relations avec la communauté afin de vraiment bien vous servir et de servir notre mandat. Donc, les artistes et les organismes artistiques jouent un rôle essentiel dans la vie et la culture, non seulement du Canada, mais à travers le monde. Et c'est votre leadership, votre talent, la créativité, vos forces et votre dévouement continue envers les arts au moment où nous sommes tous confrontés à des défis de plus en plus importants. C'est vraiment une source d'inspiration et c'est à mon nom, mais au nom du Conseil des arts que je tiens à vous remercier pour votre excellent travail. So in terms of top priorities, we want to keep delivering on our strategic plan commitments, and that includes supporting the sector in rebuilding to be more sustainable, inclusive, equitable, to continuing to increase access to our funding, to prioritize our support for Indigenous, Black, racialized, deaf, disabled, and official language minority communities, for honoring the commitments to self-determination that we've made to Indigenous peoples and nations, and also improving the regional distribution of our funding. So in my first year, in my first 6 months, actually, it's been 6 months, I've been traveling across the country, meeting stakeholders in person and online, including many of you, and I thank you for those meetings. So, and the whole reason is so that we could have conversations like this one, where I can hear directly from you about your challenges, your priorities, but also all of your ideas as to how we can work better together. What I've been hearing is that all parts of the sector are struggling. So whether it's decreased revenues or increased costs or inflation, difficulties in attracting and retaining key staff, bringing back audiences, I'm hearing this consistently from all parts of the sector and all parts of the country. And I know that the long-term impacts of the pandemic continue to be felt, and that the future, even our present, is quite uncertain. But I'm really confident that it's by working together as a sector that we can really move forward and manage what's coming and what we're experiencing. So another thing that I just want to say very directly, over the last few months, I've also been hearing that many of you feel disconnected from the Canada Council and don't feel very well served by us. And I want to say that I hear that, and I know that we can do better. And we are working really hard to respond to those concerns that we've heard around the ways that we can serve you. We're also working on being more transparent, which is one of the key things that I've been hearing. We need to do better at explaining the context and the realities that affect not just our work, but what's affecting public arts funding as a whole. We want to be more transparent and open about the decisions we make, but not just the decisions, but what brought us to those decisions and why. And to consult and dialogue with you about decision-making, and also by making our data more accessible and easier to understand. And I would say, along with our data, our processes around granting. So not just on our website, but all the different platforms that exist. So in the coming months, together with colleagues from the Canada Council, we plan to continue to engage with artists, people who work in the arts, with organizations, funders, which are a really important part of this landscape that we work in more conversations and consultations. So I also want to acknowledge that it has been a challenging time for the Canada Council. So we no longer have pandemic-related funding to distribute, which means that we are operating with our base budget. And overall, we know that the federal government, of which we're part of, is also in an era of fiscal restraint. So at the same time, the Canada Council, I think like many funders, are facing an unprecedented increase in applications and higher than average grant amounts requested across most of our granting programs. And that reality, combined with having our base budget to invest in, has meant concretely that success rates have gone down. So that is a challenge for us to manage, of course, but we also see this increase in application volume as an indicator that the Canada Council is successfully reaching new artists and that our funding is becoming more accessible. But in the bigger picture, it's a really clear sign of a growing need and demand for direct support from the Canada Council. And the Canada Council is really uniquely positioned to offer that direct support as the only federal public arts funder that serves the entirety of the Canadian arts ecosystem, individual artists as well as organizations. And of course, we do that in partnership and collaboration with the funding landscape. So public art funders, and as Paul said earlier in his remarks, the philanthropic sector. So we're really looking at the system of funding. And we do have a proven track record. I'm really proud of our colleagues at the council who were able to deliver $500 million in federal emergency funding during the height of the pandemic, providing recovery funding, especially to artists and arts workers and arts organizations across Canada in a time of really great need. And now looking forward, we are really committed. I'm committed to working in new ways with the sector to help address these longstanding challenges. And we know that, it's not just the arts sectors that's suffering. There's challenges across the board. So there are a lot of voices out there that are asking for support. And so for the arts sector to be heard amongst the great need that exists, I feel that we have to be aligned on what is the distinct case for public and generally funding for the arts, but specific to the Canada Council for public funding of the arts. And I really believe that collaboration is essential for serving the arts community in a way that's sustainable and equitable, and in order to build what is that voice for public funding for the arts. And we all come at it from our different perspectives and voices. So we have artists and organizations and people who work in the arts and funders and philanthropists, and we're all passionate champions for the arts in Canada. So the question is, and this is why this opportunity to have this conversation is so essential, is what can we do to move forward together? Donc, on est vraiment, en tant qu'artistes, d'organismes artistiques, travailleuses et travailleurs dans le secteur des arts, dans les bailleurs de fonds, les philanthropes, vraiment, là, on est très passionnés pour défendre les arts au Canada. Donc, ma question pour nous, c'est comment et que pouvons-nous faire ensemble pour aller de l'avant? So, those are my opening remarks, and I really look forward to having a conversation with Carla and Christina, who are part of the coalition. And I'm really happy that my colleague, Lise Ann Johnson, who's the Acting Director General of our granting programs, is going to be able to join me for parts of the dialogue. So Carla and Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Lise Ann, also for coming here to join Michelle. And thank you for your engagement again, Michelle, to recognize all the work that artists and organizations are doing to work into connecting together, also to reconnect, to share your data, the reason why you want to do this, you make your decision, that's really appreciated. And also to talk about the context in which now the council is working, to be very transparent about it. And you said, like during your listening tour, that you heard about the challenges that we're facing, and there are many. You named it, Paul named it. But for you, in the next future, in 2024, which were the 3 top issues that you and the Art Council wants to work on?
Thank you. Yeah, this is exactly, I guess, part of what I've been thinking about as I've been in this job. And so I guess the way I would summarize the top 3, because there's so many, first of all, is how do we support the sector in the recovery and the rebuilding and the transformation? So for us, of course, as a funder, we want to make sure our resources are aligned with what are the requirements in the sector. So, even though for some parts of the society, it seems like, the pandemic is in the past, we know for sure, and we hear this every day, that the long-term impacts continue to be felt. So we know that many organizations are struggling. Some are not even able to cover the expenses in the months to come. We know that inflation and rising costs have a huge impact, and that the arts funding doesn't go as far as it used to. So what we need to do in terms of priorities is really monitor and understand the situation. We want to be in very close contact with all of the other funders, so at the provincial, territorial, municipal levels. And we want to look at co-investing in programs that help organizations either rethink their operations or to make adjustments. And I want to say we're very open to having those conversations I know sometimes it can be challenging to say, oh, you know, we're struggling or we're not really sure. And just know that we understand and we want to be working together. So I have to say that when you are struggling, being open with us is not going to jeopardize your funding. So that's I know sometimes like the things that we inherit as part of systems. So yeah, that's one priority. Second, and they're not in order, they just happen to be the top three, is the question of equity. So we really, really strongly believe that in order to meet our mandate, we need to ensure that fair and equitable access to our funding and access to the arts from communities across the country is there. So we want to increase access and funding, especially for our Indigenous, Black, racialized, deaf, disabled, official language minority communities. It's essential. That's part of the whole relevance of a public arts funder. We're also focused on really looking at the historical imbalances in funding in different regions. It's clear that has come up through all of the conversations, which is again tied to the question of relevance and really meeting the goals of the essential nature of our mandate. And the last thing I would say in terms of priorities is what I would call what I've been hearing around disconnection. So really saying, frankly, openly, I know that the sector feels disconnected from the Canada Council. And I acknowledge that, not defensive about it. I actually see it. And it's not because the staff at the Canada Council are so devoted, passionate, engaged. It is the nature of where we are today for all sorts of reasons. But what I do want to say, it is a priority for us at the Canada Council. We will be engaging. And that includes also with other funders and organizations like Business in the Arts, the Coalition, National Arts Service organizations. So everyone who's part of the arts ecosystem. So I really think that it's through this engagement and conversations and being open and listening is that we're going to have those relationships that at the end we have the same desire, which is serve the sector as best we can.
Thank you, Michelle. Over to you, Christina.
Michelle, one of the many things the coalition does is consults with the sector, works with the sector, and prepares a pre-budget submission, as we did recently in August 2023 for budget 2024, which we are all awaiting at this moment. At the moment, we're in a different time since submitting our last brief, and we're going to be beginning the process all over again. So what should our collective advocacy goals be? And if I might just say, in a cheeky manner, if one of those goals were monetary, what might the increase, what might be the impact of a significant increase be to the Canada Council?
That's a great question. Okay, let me start by saying that we all have different roles. As a federal crown corporation, we are under certain, not rules, I would say, but we work in a certain model. And I think it's the combination of all of our different voices and perspectives that will lead to a really strong case, if you will, for funding. So I see the Canada Council, we see ourselves as real champions of the arts, where we want to work in parallel and in alignment with what I call the more advocacy efforts, if you want to use that language. But so when we look at advocacy, we see how do we champion the arts? How do we make the case that public investment in the arts is absolutely essential? So I think the more we're able to share and connect, the stronger our case for public funding will be, because we need, even though we have different voices, we need some form of alignment. Because if one group is making a case for this and another group is making a case for that and another group makes a case for that, well, it all ends up in the decision makers, and then you get a lot of disjointed or confusing proposals. So what I would like to see is how can we work together? And not to say that there could be differences, and that's completely normal, and we want that. But I think when it comes to public investment in the arts, we really see the Canada Council as being absolutely able to deliver, given that we have the history, but also the structures and the capacity. So what we know is that for us, increased funding, increases needing across all parts of the sector. For example, when I made reference to the increase in applications, we have seen 150% increase in applications in some programs. That is unprecedented. So we would certainly welcome any increase to our budget, with the idea that it would all be reinvested into the sector. So there are the pressing needs that we've talked about, but I think it's also an opportunity to talk more about what are our shared priorities and shared objectives. And I really meant it when I said we don't have all the answers, and I don't want to come at these meetings and say, oh, and here's what we're going to do. It's, you know what, here's the issues we're all grappling with. What are your thoughts? What do you think a wise investment, a fair investment, an equitable investment would look like? So I actually want to hear from all of you as to what role the Canada Council can play to advance a funding argument, I would say.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you pointed out and centered the importance of talking about how we make the case for the arts, because I think we're all in this position and this process right now of imagining various different scenarios in Ottawa as we look to the future. All of them, the scenarios might be different, but all of them seem to share in common a continued context of some fiscal restraint. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in making that case for the arts, what do you think are going to be the most useful and effective messages? Noting that we often rely on three different kinds of messaging. There's the economic impact and the quantitative impact. We sometimes focus on the qualitative impact, civic impact, social cohesion, community impact of the arts, and of course, always increased messaging for equity, diversity, inclusion, and access. So, what are going to be the most effective messages in your view, as we look to these many different scenarios that we might be seeing ourselves in Ottawa in the future?
Well, I think we always have to start with the question of impact. We need to be able to demonstrate that by investing, public investment in the arts has incredible impacts on so many levels, whether it's on well-being, community health, social cohesion, financial and economic. And, the messages I'm getting here in Ottawa is that the qualitative questions are really critical, but numbers and data are the critical point around evidence-based argumentation. So we can talk about how wonderful the arts are, but unless you're able to demonstrate that with strong data, it is a very challenging ask, if you will. So, and now, the context that we're in is so critical. We're entering in this period of fiscal restraint. We know that the government has announced government-wide initiatives to refocus spending. So I think the more we can demonstrate the impact on Canadians, the impact on communities and communities across this country, that is how we're going to make, I think, really compelling arguments. And, for us at the Canada Council, we're very much guided also by our strategies and our strategic plans. So I think there's also some really core principles at heart, which is around equity and Indigenous self-determination, and looking at how do institutions work from a decolonization model. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit, but I think those are really critical points. But maybe I'll just pass it over to my colleague Lise Ann, who can add a little bit more on this question.
Sure. I'm going to build a little bit on Michelle's remarks and maybe talk a bit about some of the ways this fiscal restraint will play out in terms of our funding programs and the delivery of our support. If there is no increased investment in public arts funding. So we want to be very transparent in particular about the context for future core funding competitions. So core funding, just so everyone is clear, that's the recurring support that the council provides for the operations of arts organizations and literary publishers. So we will be entering a number of deadlines, core competition deadlines, as part of the next cycle of core funding competitions. And we do want to be very upfront about the fact that those competitions will be very competitive. We know from our own data that there is a high number of eligible applicants, so new publishers, new arts organizations who will be applying for the first time. And we do believe that generational renewal is important for the overall health of the arts ecosystem. We also, as Michelle has mentioned, we want to be transparent, and we understand that there are inequities in the distribution of our funding, both regionally, but also for underserved and historically marginalized groups. So without additional investment in the council, the only way that we will be able to bring new organizations into our core funding programs, or to address some of the inequities that we're seeing in the distribution of our funding, is by working with the funding that we have. So increases to core funded organizations, although we recognize that there is significant need with the context of a slow recovery, with inflation, with increased cost, we recognize that need. The only way that we will be able to address some of the things that we want to achieve through our strat plan is by working with the funding that we have. So increases to currently core funded organizations to address things like rising costs is highly unlikely. However, I do want to also reassure you and recognize that the state of the sector. So we want to reassure you that we're paying very close attention to what's happening in the sector and the context that that provides for assessment of core competitions. We know that you're feeling the pinch. We know that revenues have not kept pace with increased costs. Many of you are struggling. This is impacting what you program, what you disseminate, how you're connecting with your public and stakeholders. So we do know that you cannot do more with less. So our assessment is not going to focus on the quantity of what you do. It's really going to be focused on how well you meet the criteria in the context that everyone is operating in. I also want to reassure people that for each of the core deadlines, we'll be doing outreach, we'll hold consultation sessions well ahead of the deadline so that everyone clearly understands the financial context as well as the process for assessment and allocation. And also maybe I'll just, before handing this back to Michelle, I'll just say, I want to reiterate our commitment to core funding. While the council is the only federal arts funder that provides project grants directly to individuals, groups, collectives, and we do absolutely believe that that is an extremely important, unique, and crucial role that the council plays. We're committed to supporting arts organizations and literary publishers as anchors in the arts ecosystem. So we'll be working over the next 2 years on another strategic plan, including future directions on our funding distribution. And I know that Michelle has a lot of thoughts and plans for how we'll be consulting with the sector on the development of that next strategic plan. Michelle, I'll hand this back to you so you can also address the rest of the question.
Thanks, Lise Ann. So just to wrap up, I think what I've been hearing is that we do have a collective goal, which is a thriving, sustainable, equitable art sector. I guess the question now is what sets us apart? You know, when I made reference to their needs across the board in all sorts of sectors, and I think there's some absolutely amazing things that sets the arts apart. You know, we not only do we create jobs and contribute to the economy, there's direct ties to improving quality of life and mental health and wellness of Canadians, especially in a context of, you know, all of us trying to recover from 3 years of pandemic horrors. You know, the arts are also really important platforms where we can raise very complex issues, both locally, but that are happening in the world. It also gives amazing platforms for such a diversity of voices. and on and on and on. I mean, I think I'm talking to people who know this even better than me. So I think for us, it's at the Canada Council is let's work together to build that really compelling case based on evidence. And we do have, you know, a bunch of different metrics, but again, we'd love to work with you to figure out what are those metrics and yeah, work together. So I'll stop there.
Lise Ann and Michelle, thank you for that part of the conversation. We really appreciate, first of all, to know what we have to expect around core funding. I think it's very important to have that context in the restraint economy, but also the reiteration that Conseil is gonna consult with the milieu, and we have to make up the story and the data in a united way. That is very, very important to move forward and not to see the future on what we want to do. And all the person who attended, we had 85 questions submitted, but we chose a few. And Sarah, I'm gonna give the floor to you because you're gonna moderate that part of the conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carla and Christina. I'm Tara from PAA Advisory Conseil, and we support the Canadian Arts Coalition and its membership in advancing the advocacy work forward. So, Michelle, absolutely love your remarks and the inspiration that it can bring for how we can collaborate for federal systems and policy change. Of course, as mentioned, there were 85 questions submitted, so we organized them into themes, and what I'm already seeing blowing up in the chat are questions around the regions in particular. So our first question is, how can the Canada Council work with the regions of Canada, including provincial and municipal arts councils and governments, to support local arts development and assuage any concerns around regional inequity?
Thank you, Tara. Nice to see you. So listen, I've been working in this field and working at the Canada Council for a very long time. So when I assumed this role, it is with the full knowledge that the question of regional equity has not been resolved. And I was appointed, I think it was June 26th. And June 27, I was in Alberta because that is one of the regions, to just be very frank, where there's been a long-standing issue around the question of regional funding. So one of the first very concrete things that we've done is I put together, internal to the Canada Council, a working group that is developing a regional funding distribution strategy. And what we want to look at is how are we working not only internally to the Canada Council, but with all of our funding partners to look at this question of regional imbalances. And one of the first things that we're doing is analyzing the data, because we understand, and I've seen it just in recent, the last 6 months, that there are many different interpretations of data. And so working to having at least a common understanding of some of the data, you would be surprised at how challenging that can be, but how essential it is. Because back to the earlier questions about making the case, if we understand the data, we can use an evidence-based argument to demonstrate where the gaps are and where do we need to target efforts. And of course, we're not just doing this internally, so we're doing our homework, but we're also working really closely with our provincial, territorial, and municipal arts funders. So we have what we call tri-level meetings. So there are meetings that happen in each of the regions of Canada that bring together the federal, provincial, territorial, municipal, as well as other foundations to discuss funding from a regional perspective. We also have been trying to bring together, organized by the Canada Council, events where we bring together funders to talk about questions exactly like this one. And we also kicked off a working group like the one I mentioned internally. We started with the arts funders in Alberta. So we actually have a regional working group with the Canada Council, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Edmonton Arts Council, and Calgary Arts Development Agency to start even coming to agreement on our understanding of the data, our interpretation of the data, and then seeing what are the options or opportunities we have to, we won't be able to solve the question of regional with this, but to move the needle. And it has to start with acknowledging that there's been a longstanding issue. And I used Alberta as one area, but we are in many, many conversations with funders and the arts community across every single part of the country. And maybe just an example is the work we've been doing with the North, which has been an underserved region. And in the last few years, we've developed what we call co-delivery agreements. So this is, and they've been predominantly serving Indigenous communities, but we do it in partnership with partners in the ground, including with Indigenous communities, who we feel are best able to identify those specificities in those communities. So trying to have a different model that it's not always the Canada Council that has all the answers or all the mechanisms, and we're very open to looking at new models of delivering funding. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I'm seeing some appreciation in the chat and acknowledgement of data with a lot of nuance, and can appreciate the action steps that you're taking with partners in different regions. Thank you. The second question or major theme that came up from our 85 submitted questions was, what is the Council's approach to greening and climate change?
Oh yeah, that's a really huge, I think, common challenge. And I'm really happy that Lise Ann can respond this one for us.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So this is an evolving area for everyone, and helping the sector mitigate the impact of climate change is part of our strategic plan. It is a priority. And it's an area that we're still growing. To date, what we've done in terms of supporting a greener sector, we've done it in a number of different ways, primarily through partnerships, contributions, of course, grants. And we're also closely following what other arts funders are doing in this area. So maybe I'll just pull a few examples. We've supported several really important climate-related projects that are meant to provide broader support for the arts sector and for organizations and arts professionals to be able to mitigate the impact of climate change in the arts sector. And so one example is we're supporting an organization called Scale, which is a network within the arts sector that's committed to addressing climate emergency and environmental injustice. We've also funded a really terrific program called the Creative Climate Leadership Program in Canada. It's aligned to an international movement. It really is an international training and transformation program. It's designed to empower artists and cultural professionals to take action on climate. And then we've also invested significantly in the Creative Green Tools Canada. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, I really encourage you to check that out. The Creative Green Tools, it's a free set of carbon calculation and reporting tools. It allows arts organizations to record, measure, understand the impact of their activities, but also has additional benefits in terms of ways that you can potentially help out your bottom line in a way that is extremely carbon friendly. So it's an area that we want to make sure the sector is well supported to make that transition of being more environmentally sustainable. For any of you who are working in this area, please check out the support that is available through our Strategic Innovation Fund. We have grants available for projects, small, medium, large, that help us collectively tackle this problem and move towards a more sustainable, greener, and healthy arts sector. And we're, of course, very open to ideas that are coming from the sector and other ways that the council could support greening the arts sector and supporting climate related projects.
Thank you so much, Lise Ann. And those were a lot of practical tools and really great ways that certain projects and organizations are supported. I see that a few people have put some links in the chat to the Creative Green Tools Canada. So keep those links coming so we can be empowered in continuing this work. Of course, we've already talked a little bit about core-funded organizations, the rebuilding, sustainability of funding. But the third major theme that came out of our pre-submitted questions was, what support can the council offer for organizations on the brink? So how are you going to help with managing the waves of potential closures that are on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a really challenging, those are the most challenging conversations, I have to say. So I do want to acknowledge that we have been having some of those conversations, and it's really devastating. I mean, they're awful. But I also have to be really transparent that given the context that we're in, the Canada Council, and I think actually most of the arts funders that we've been speaking with, we're not in financial positions to rescue organizations in financial difficulty. I think by the time you get there, I think something else needs to be looked at. So it's the idea that we're not in a bailout strategy, but that does not mean that we cannot offer other types of support. And I said it at the beginning, and I'm going to pass it over to Lise Ann, who's going to speak to this. But come and talk to us. You know, the warning signs are always there. We know this. So don't feel that your funding is going to be jeopardized if you come to us early with the trouble. And we will work also. It's again, you know, I've said this before, we're not just the only players we work with all of the other funding partners. We're constantly on the phone in meetings, and whenever there's a crisis, we the first thing, you know, Lise Ann does, calls her counterpart. So we really do want to encourage that. I'll pass this to Lise Ann to speak a little bit more about it.
Sure. And I want to underline a couple of things that Michelle has said, because I think there's a few ways of looking at this. And one is at the kind of collective, larger level of the health of the arts ecosystem and what the role the council can play in terms of understanding and reflecting back and championing the needs of organizations in this particularly difficult recovery. And then there's what we can do for you as individual organizations and those that may be struggling with their bottom line. So just for example, I spoke with an organization last week who they're struggling looking at pulling back their programming, having troubles attracting audiences. Everything's turned upside down, increased costs, but also no one knows what the perfect model is to be able to engage audiences that have come and gone and changed and shifted. You know, in that conversation, you know, I said, you must be getting a lot of support from your colleagues in your community, because everybody's going through the same thing. And the response that I got back was, I found really interesting. Both the artistic director and the executive director said, you know, it's really lonely. You probably have a better picture of it than we do. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody, you know, we don't want to jeopardize our relationships. We don't want to be caught in the bit of a media storm. And it made me realize that I actually think organizations like the Canada Council, it's really important that you talk to us, because we can help bring the bigger picture up. We can help reflect it. We can help, you know, help communicate the needs that we're seeing in the sector. So it's important to talk to us for the bigger picture, but it's also important to just talk to us in terms of your own funding relationship with us. So, you know, as Michelle said, we don't have the resources to save core-funded organizations from bankruptcy, and certainly not numerous core-funded organizations from bankruptcy. But we do know that many of you are struggling with your bottom line. So what we can do is we can be flexible and we can be really understanding. That might mean adjusting your payment schedule. That may be understanding that you have to change your programming, that you need support to rethink your operations. You may need time to rethink your operations. We are investing along with other funders in programs that support capacity building, so leadership development. We know there's been a big turnover of leadership in the arts sector over the last number of years, capacity building, supporting transitions. So whether that's mergers, closures, collaborative ways of working, we do have support for that. We have support. We're investing in those programs that will be delivered by municipal funders and provincial funders, but we also have grants available for that type of thing, revenue diversification, organizational transformation through the seed component of our Strategic Innovation Fund. So we do have some support to give you time and a bit of money to seek outside support to rethink what you're doing if that is a help. And just to say, every organization situation is unique. You all have individual circumstances. So just reach out to us, keep the lines of communication going, and we can certainly be as flexible as we can. So please do talk to us if you are struggling as an organization. And fill out your, I know people hate CADAC, but I'm just going to give a little plug to CADAC. The CADAC data is really important for us. It really helps us understand both the financial data and the statistical data. It really helps us understand what's going on in the sector, and it is a collective resource for all of us. That data is very rich. I know it's a pain. I know it can be improved, but the data helps us build an argument. It helps you build an argument, and it is helping us see a kind of global picture of what's going on. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Lise Ann. I just want to have one final thing, and then I know we're almost out of time, but so we talk about regional, and of course, I used Alberta as one great example, but I want to reiterate that our intention is to serve all parts of the country as best we can. So when we look at our priorities, it's every province, every territory, every region, and doing everything we can. So we look at our data from all sorts of angles, if you will. And I will be in BC at the end of February to continue my listening and learning. But I also want to say that please reach out to the Canada Council, to me, to Lise Ann, to my colleague Craig, who's here, to any of us, because I really meant it when I said I want to continue this conversation, and that we are very open to continue to anyone who'd like to meet with me. Really happy to do that. So thanks you again for this wonderful invitation and opportunity to connect.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Lise Ann, for your candor, transparency, and ongoing support. And we know the action is being taken. And kudos to everyone who pre-submitted questions, because those were not easy questions to ask, nor generally easy questions to answer. And so appreciate the collaboration on that. So to thank Michelle and Lise Ann, and to close off this session, and to talk a little bit about next steps for federal arts advocacy. So what, as a sector, are we going to do together over the course of this year? I'd like to hand it over to Sarah Eiley of the Coalition Steering Committee.
Thanks very much, Tara, and thank you, Michelle and Lise Ann, for your wonderful candor and your invitation to work with you. We really look forward to working with you, to helping to provide some of that data that's going to be really important, and to help build the many cases that are out there to really encourage people to support the arts. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I now want to turn to the 700 or so.
So do I leave now? Sorry, I forgot the notes. Okay, I was told when I'm supposed to leave. Listen, I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to future conversations. Have a real wonderful end of meeting.
Don't worry, everyone. We will be in touch.
I hope so. Take care.
Thank you, and goodbye. And I now want to turn to thank the 700 or so people who registered for this webinar. It just shows the incredibly importance of having this kind of a conversation. And I think we are really impressed that the Canada Council is really wanting to speak with us. But who is us? We have had, you've heard all of the challenges that are facing the entire sector, and the Canadian Arts Coalition really tries to speak on behalf of everybody. but we can't do it without you. We need everyone on this call to join the coalition. Please sign up today, because what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a full breadth of the art sector as part of the coalition's collective, collaborative voice that we can take to Ottawa. By February the 15th, that's our deadline, because that's when we're going to begin the planning and the prioritizing of what we need to do to build a really strong case for advocacy at the federal level. That's only 2 weeks away, but that's when we'll be starting to decide what we put in our budget submission. What are we going to say in appearances before committees? How are we going to build an Arts Day on the Hill that reaches every single politician? What else can we do to really advocate for how important and essential this sector is and what it needs at this time? So a few of us have managed to work through the past difficult years, keeping the messages relevant and being reactive, but we really need now to be proactive, to work with you, to hear from you, and to build a cohesive, collective, and credible advocacy voice for the arts. So please do join us. The membership link is in the chat. And I want to now really thank Business for the Arts, which has been a valued member of the coalition really from the beginning, because this has been an important, I think, opportunity for everybody across the country to really listen to what the issues are, to have a chance to speak with each other, and to begin the conversation we need to do to build really strong advocacy. And I also want to thank Power Corporation for understanding how important it is to provide us with these opportunities to gather together. So thank you to Business for the Arts. Thank you to Power Corporation. Thank you to my colleagues on the steering committee of the Canadian Arts Coalition. Thank you to PAA. And thank you all of you for joining us today. Goodbye.